Hello and welcome to another edition of Questions for Lawyers. I'm your host, personal injury attorney Jeff Adelman, and these days there are a lot of questions about people's financial stability. Huge companies are filing for bankruptcy. People have a lot of questions. People are worried. So I reached out to a friend of the show, my good friend Steve Orchard, who is a bankruptcy attorney. He's been on the program with us before. Steve, thank you for being with us today.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I would imagine, Steve, that with your practice, while I think everybody is a little down in terms of the calls they're getting, you're getting quite a few calls and people are afraid.
No, that's absolutely true. We're going through an unprecedented time in our history. It's not a local issue. It's not even a national issue. This is an international issue that's affected everybody's pocketbooks, everybody's job stability. It's really just thrown everything into turmoil. And, we can look at the government's efforts to bring some stability here and applaud some things and question some other things. But I think at the end of the day, people are still very, very concerned about what tomorrow holds and, what their financial future is going to look like. So you're 100% right. The calls are starting to come in at a higher level, and I anticipate over the next 3 to 6 months, it'll be much higher than that.
What generally are the questions that you're getting from people who are, affected by this pandemic economically?
Well, I think a lot of the questions center around, and one of the most popular questions actually is about this new stimulus payment through the CARES Act. And they're very concerned about, if they receive that payment or recently received that payment, whether they will lose that. What I can share with you is I've seen a directive from the U.S. Trustee's office that they are going to stay away from taking any CARES Act stimulus payments to debtors because of the nature of that relief. It was intended to get people through this difficult time. So even if it may put somebody, quote, over exemptions, I think the policy indicates that they don't want to see that money leave the individual's hands and go into the estate, absent some extraordinary and crazy circumstance. But a lot of people have been asking me that, and I'm confident in telling them, if you have to go into bankruptcy, if that's your last resort, you're at least not going to lose that CARES Act stimulus.
Because the purpose of the CARES Act was to try to keep the businesses going. And I guess it makes sense if the business actually made those attempts and still was not able to do it. It would be like rubbing salt in the wound to try to claw that back as well.
Yeah, it's a double whammy. So the government would have given sort of a lifeline and then immediately taken that back, not directly, obviously it doesn't go into the government's pockets, but it would be given to the individual and then taken right back. But there is something interesting also with the other loans, the payroll protection program and the economic disaster loans. One of the questions that was asked on the applications was, are you a debtor in bankruptcy? And there's actually a lot of case law that's being formulated right now as to whether or not somebody or business that's actively in a bankruptcy proceeding is eligible for any of these types of disaster assistance loans. And it's coming out more rapidly in favor of, for the policy reasons that we've already said, it's coming more in favor of these individuals or debtors being eligible for the loan so that they can have a lifeline. But, it's an ever-changing area. And, I imagine within the next few months, some things will be crystallized.
For sure. What that will be, that's anybody's guess right now, because it seems like
That's
it's changing every week.
That's right.
I mean, it's not just people we know. It's not just your friends, neighbors. The big corporations are having problems too. Just today, I saw Neiman Marcus filed for bankruptcy.
Yeah, you look at some of the guidance that's come out and you look at some of these major industries, companies that we had sort of taken for granted that they would be viable companies, especially over the past few years where we've been considered to have a strong economy. But we have, gymnasiums. Gold's Gym is one of the first dominoes to fall there. So, obviously without members coming into the gym, they can't support, their rent payments and leases, et cetera. But I think that also opens up another question that nobody has the answer to right now. When these gyms across the country do reopen, who's going to be willing to go to the gym? What type of limitations and restrictions are going to be placed upon them? Is everybody going to be required to socially distance themselves as they are in the outside world and wear a mask? And there are going to be some people, just as with anything else, retail or restaurants or travel, that may just say it's not worth the risk for me. I'm just going to stay away. So I unfortunately, it looks like, you mentioned some of the bigger bankruptcy filings that are coming in. We have some retail with J. Crew. You mentioned now Neiman Marcus. The cruise line industry has had a couple of companies that have teetered. Hertz Rental Car has been in the conversation as well. So there are a lot of industries that literally overnight went from profitable industries to on the verge of or actually in bankruptcy. I read that even Disney, who, if you would have said at the beginning of this year that Disney World might have some financial troubles, you'd say you're crazy. Of course they're not going to have financial troubles. The place is packed. They're number one in movies, et cetera. I read that their income was down 97% for the first quarter as opposed to last calendar year. So, and that's, again, that falls into the same category. Are people going to go to Disney World with the same in the same numbers that they did pre-pandemic? Are they going to go to the movies the same way pre-pandemic? We just don't know.
I think that's such a good point that I think that is getting lost here. You can reopen a lot of these businesses, but I don't want to go sit in a movie theater right now. I don't really feel like being in a packed restaurant, even if you tell me you're open. And I know I'm not alone with that. So what happens to those businesses? I mean, the Outback Steakhouse just opened a giant dining room in Coral Springs. They opened a new Outback. It's these are a lot of, the whole economy is going to change in terms of how we spend money, what the services are and all that. I mean, there's also some opportunity there if you're forward thinking.
No, there's no doubt about it. And, I share some of the same feelings as you when I look at some of these newer restaurants or bigger restaurants. And I think to myself, my goodness, what a horrible time to have expanded or to gone into this space. And, now we see that there may be openings of 25% capacity. And I read somebody's opinion. I wish I could attribute it to them, but they said a 25% operational restaurant is a bankrupt restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I would tend to agree with that. So I think unless these businesses are going to be able to run, at or near what they were doing pre-pandemic, it's going to be impossible for them to be profitable business ventures, not to mention the trickle-down effect of if the business is running at 25% capacity, they only need 25% of the staff. And that leaves the other quarter, 3/4 of their staff without employment or seeking it somewhere else. So, the answers, I certainly haven't got the answers. And, I think only time is going to tell how this thing shakes out.
Well, what you don't have the answers, but I always looked at bankruptcy as like you're giving somebody a lifeline. Like you're saying, look, I know things are bad, but we're giving you the ability to come out of the hole. And I know that there have been some changes to the laws for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Steve?
Sure. And, I want to also hone in on something that you just mentioned because you used the word, I think, lifeline. And there are provisions of the bankruptcy code that are called the fresh start provisions. Mm-hmm. So I always emphasize that to clients as well. When they go into the bankruptcy process, we want them to come out better than they went in, obviously, and with not being saddled with the problems financially that brought them into the process. So, they do get that lifeline or fresh start once the case is concluded. But yeah, you mentioned that there were changes to what's called a small business bankruptcy. And as chance would have it, it wasn't as a result of the coronavirus. It actually was implemented shortly before. There were some parts of the CARES Act that raised some limits within the case, meaning who was a small debtor. But basically, without being too technical on it here, there is a large segment of the business population that they might have a viable business in there somewhere. And Chapter 11 is intended for that business that somewhere within the structure of the business, there's a viable business, profitable business, but they just need to restructure. They can keep the doors open. They can keep going. They need to restructure. Maybe it's getting rid of a lease or an unprofitable contract that they have. But in some way, they're going to gain some relief. So within that business, it's going to be successful. That's the Chapter 11 process in a nutshell. Here locally, 2J's recently filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And I think
you cut out a little bit. Can you go back about 10 seconds?
Sure. I was just saying that the Chapter 11, the purpose of the 11 is to keep the doors open and keep the business operational. And we're going to see that here locally. A lot of times when I'm asked about the differences between chapters, I'll typically say, if there's a local business that's filed an 11, I'll say, look, you go to that business and you would never know that they had filed a bankruptcy case unless I told you or you researched it or read it in the news. And I think that's what we're going to see with 2J's once they get back to, quote, normal, whatever that is. We'll see that their doors are open, that they're serving sandwiches, they've got coffee in the morning, and hopefully they'll have some patrons in the dining room. But again, we never would have known from the outside world that they were in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy unless we had discovered that in other ways. So basically, getting back to your original question, the Small Business Reorganization Act that came out shortly before the coronavirus really hit us here, it took out a lot of the restrictions. So I was starting to mention before, there are businesses that there's the bones, the structure, there's something in there that makes it a viable company. They just need to be able to restructure. Chapter 11 itself, a lot of times made it cost prohibitive. The business that was already struggling didn't have the money that was necessary to properly retain counsel and professionals and to go through the mechanics that were required in a Chapter 11 case. So the new act has cut off a lot of those requirements. It's streamlined some of the process. It's taken some of the creditors' voices out, at least immediately. So it puts more control into the hands of the debtor. From what I see, it's going to be a better tool for a lot of businesses that otherwise wouldn't have had bankruptcy relief available to them. They can now elect to be a small business debtor, and the process has a much higher likelihood of success and should ultimately cost the business less.
Who qualifies for that? Who's considered a small business?
Yeah, small business is basically, it's, right now the debt levels are around $7 million. That's raised temporarily due to the CARES Act. It's going to go back to its original amount of $2.7 million. Basically, if you know it when you see it based on those limits. But again, it's going to be something I think that's available to a lot of people. So we're going to see a lot more businesses that I think are going to fall within that within those parameters, especially because of the CARES Act amendment.
Now, when bankruptcy is declared, you don't lose everything. You do get to keep some things. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that? What things a person or a corporation would be able to keep?
Sure. What I'd say first and foremost is this. Every bankruptcy is different. It's very tough for somebody who's who's about to go through the process or is contemplating the process to say, well, my friend or my brother filed bankruptcy and this is what happened to them. Very difficult to do. So what I would encourage first and foremost is anybody who's thinking about this or having financial difficulties, they need to sit and actually put pen to paper and look at their own individual financial circumstances, and we can best determine what's going to happen. But generally speaking, as under the law, there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, an individual isn't going to lose their home as long as they've lived in it for a period of time, and they're current on their payments and can afford the payments. You're not going to lose your home. You're generally not going to lose your retirement accounts or annuities or pensions. Cars are one thing that strikingly do not have a very large exemption. I have clients that say, are they really going to take my car, my sole mean of getting to and from work, getting the kids to school? And it's just a dollars and cents figure. So there's only a very limited exemption for automobiles. But, again, the big ones are the house, retirement accounts, annuities. Those are things that you're generally going to keep through the process. And again, realistically, it's not necessarily written in the statute, but nobody really wants the clothes off your back or your household goods and furnishings. I have clients, especially some of my elderly clients, that are concerned about that, and there's just no real other market for that. So nobody really wants to take that stuff out of your home.
Well, that's good to know, because my Blackhawks jerseys are in the safe, so they're always.
Well, the sentimental value is off the chart on those.
That doesn't count. Well, let me ask you this. Chapters, we've talked about Chapter 11, but obviously people have heard about Chapter 7, Chapter 13. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. And I think over the next few months, we're probably going to see an uptick in Chapter 7 bankruptcy cases. Mm-hmm. There is basically an income test, and I think that's, after I explain this, you'll see why I think there's going to be more 7. So generally speaking, if you're making more than the average person in
your state, you need you to go back again about 5 seconds. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So basically the first thing in between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 is, whether or not you're eligible. So there's income limitations that are put on there. And what that means is you basically compare yourself to somebody who's just like you. So somebody that, has the same amount of kids, same number of spouse, can only be one, but, whether you're married or single.
I think, it's just one.
Just one, last time I checked. So basically you compare yourself to that fictional individual. If you're making more than that person, then you're supposed to be in a Chapter 13 where you're repaying a portion of your debt. Chapter 7 is not intended for you to make regular payments. Chapter 7 is a liquidation. So what that means is any assets that you have that are over and above exemptions are taken from you, they're liquidated and given to your creditors. Chapter 13 doesn't really operate that way. Chapter 13 just means that you're paying what you can afford to pay every month. The term is disposable income. So you make that payment. Plans range from 36 to 60 months. You make your payments and then you're out of your case. But either way, you get the same piece of paper called a discharge, which basically precludes your creditors from coming back and trying to collect upon the debts that you've included in your bankruptcy case.
With this pandemic, everybody's had to change the way they practice law, the way you live your life. How have you adapted to the changes with, say, using Zoom and some of the other technologies that we've been forced to adopt?
Yeah, well, you can probably see I'm sitting in my home office right now. Mm-hmm. So that was the first major adaptation. I'm a sole practitioner, so I take pride in getting to know my clients and meeting with them personally and walking them through the process. So my first adjustment was not being able to be in my office with my clients, going over this stuff face to face. I have adapted this Zoom technology where I can, speak as you and I are right now with the clients and go over documentation. If there's something that needs to be signed and I can't get them into an office or, somewhere else, this may be a way that we can sort of work around that and at least have the signature authenticated in some manner, not notarized, but at least I saw what's going on and can say that I've seen it and I know the person. A lot more telephonic stuff is going on. So today I was actually engaged in what's called a meeting of creditors over the phone. I had several this week. That's a process that was always done in person. It was very important for it to be done in person. But in light of this pandemic, the meetings of creditors have all been telephonic. which all the meetings went off really without a hitch, went pretty well. And I anticipate it'll just be smoother from this point. But, a lot of my stuff, fortunately, I have cloud-based technology for a lot of my things. I'm able to work here from the house as if I was sitting at my office. You call it what you will, but I've given my cell phone numbers to my clients and everybody since day one. Some people call me crazy. Some people call it genius, but it's just the way that I've always practiced. So clients can get a hold of me really pretty much whenever they need to. So I really haven't missed a beat from that perspective, but, not being able to be present with the client at the meeting of creditors has been an adjustment. Not being there to have them in front of me when I can go over documents with them, rather having to do it by Zoom or over the phone, has been a big adjustment.
For everybody, and for those who do not like it, or they say they don't want to do it or anything like that, or they're not going to adopt it afterwards, I'll tell you the same thing I've been saying to everybody else. To quote the great sage Ric Flair, if you don't like it, you better learn to love it, because it's not going away. It's not. The courts love it. It saves time, and it is something that probably the legal profession should have adopted earlier, but we're slow to do that. And while I certainly enjoy going to the office and meeting with people in person, thank goodness this technology exists, or I don't know really where we'd be in so many things. Think about telehealth. Think about a meeting with your clients. There's just so many aspects of life that, while it's really awful what we're dealing with, but just imagine if we did not have the Zooms, the Microsoft Teams, and the video conferencing technology. Right. And while we had a couple of snafus during this call, most of the time it's pretty good.
Well, yeah, I mean, the technology is far from perfect, but my goodness, it's light years ahead of where it would have been, 20 years ago, had we been through this same pandemic. So many businesses, you and I would not be having this conversation this way, that's for sure. So I agree with you. It's great that the technology is in place to at least be able to do what we are doing. And I agree with you on the other front too, Jeff. Once technology is introduced, particularly into the courtroom and into the legal process, it doesn't go away. And I think that, particularly in your practice area, you and I have talked about this, and I've seen it and heard it. Everybody seems to be very happy with the efficiency of the Zoom platform. So, why not? If it's saving time, saving money, making the process more efficient, it's not going anywhere.
I can tell you that in Broward County, we are going to be recording a mock Zoom jury trial on Monday. And I'm involved in that, and I've seen a sample of it. It's incredible, but we have to be looking ahead. The courts are closed throughout Florida through at least July 2nd for jury trials. I don't think we're going to have jury trials the rest of the year, to be honest with you, because how are you going to get social distancing for jurors? So we're thinking about all these different things, and Zoom has made a lot of adjustments to their platform out of necessity, but it's really been pretty incredible, to be honest with you. I mean, the pictures are good. It's excellent in terms of being able to share exhibits, and I'm thankful that it does exist. Steve, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. If people want to get in touch with you, if they have questions, how can they do that?
Well, first off, it was my pleasure to be here. I think it's really an important topic, and hopefully I was able to give a little bit of basic insight to somebody. I think the first, the first thing that happens to somebody who's about to go through this process is they have a lot of shock and fear. And, my goal is to try and take some of that sting away. So hopefully, that's what I've accomplished here today. But my office, I actually, the office is fully operational as far as, reception is there, answering the phone calls. So my office number is 561-455-7961. The website that you've got down here at the bottom is orchardlaw.com. I can be contacted and reached through there with any questions that anybody may have. But, again, my objective here is to be a resource and to, help anybody that's just going through a trying time.
If somebody is going through a trying time right now, if you could speak with them, what would you tell them with regards to these issues?
Well, I think first and foremost, you and I may look a little younger than we are, but we've been through this kind of stuff before. I practiced. I practiced during the Great Recession, where there were a lot of people, and there were a lot of opinions that the economy is not going to recover. I think we could all agree that it recovered at least pretty well. So I think that the first thing is tomorrow is going to be a better day. Something is things are going to get better. Who knows how long it's going to take? But I think a lot of people feel relief by just knowing. A lot of people don't even want to talk about this stuff. So when I have that first phone conference or Zoom conference with them, they've at least gotten it off their chest. They feel much better. So it's not honestly so much what I say. It's more the act of being there, being receptive, being understanding. I've seen these problems from all walks of life and all different kinds of people, and the problems have arisen for all different kinds of reasons. So, my job and the way I approach this is more so than being able to say something that's going to make somebody feel better. It's being attentive and responsive and understanding.
Steve, I can't thank you enough times for coming on here. I mean, this is one of the key issues going on right now in law. And anybody who is even contemplating bankruptcy or having financial difficulty, I can't say enough how qualified Steve is. And whenever my clients have had issues, I've called Steve and he's been able to address them. He's a wealth of knowledge. Go to orchardlaw.com if you're trying to reach him. And I thank you for your time, Steve.
Thank you.
To all of you, thank you so much for listening or watching. We'll come to you again in a week or so with another quality attorney who will be answering common questions that people have for lawyers that you may not know to ask or are too scared to ask. Again, my name is Jeff Adelman. If you have any questions for me, my number is 954-341-2777. Be well, everybody.